Zayden O'Connor didn't expect to nearly collide with a woman sprinting across the deck in bare feet. Her long caramel brown hair flying behind her like a flag of rebellion. "Whoa, careful," he said, grabbing her arm before she could crash into him. She froze, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she looked up at him. Her eyes were wide, honey-colored and full of panic. "Oh, sorry. I didn't see you. I was chasing a hat." She pointed behind him where a floppy straw hat tumbled down the deck like it had a vendetta. Zayden turned, then looked back at her. "That yours?" She nodded, cheeks flushed. He glanced down at her feet. "You're gonna break a toe running like that." "I already stubbed one," she muttered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Without thinking, he jogged after the hat, scooped it up before it hit the railing, and walked it back to her. "Thank you," she said, breathless. "You didn't have to, Zayden," he interrupted, handing her the hat. "And yeah, I kinda did. You nearly knocked me over." "Piper," she replied, hugging the hat against her chest. "And technically, you were in my flight path." He laughed, actually laughed, something he hadn't done in weeks. "Fair enough." She looked down at her feet again, then up at him. "Well, thanks. For both the hat and not suing me for bodily harm." Zayden watched her walk back across the deck, barefoot, her sundress fluttering in the breeze. She didn't glance back. He stood there longer than he meant to, something about her stuck in his mind. He'd come on this cruise for business networking dinners, a few meetings with investors, and maybe a quiet spot to review the merger proposal on his desk. He never expected to nearly get tackled by a barefoot hurricane named Piper. Later that night, dressed in a black suit, he walked into the ship's private lounge for a business dinner hosted by one of the tech founders he was investing in. The crowd buzzed with designer dresses, polished conversations, and the clinking of expensive wine glasses. He was halfway through his bourbon when he spotted her across the room. Piper. But she looked completely different. Heels, hair curled, a sleek emerald dress that hugged her like it had been stitched for her alone. Her smile was the same though bright, a little mischievous, like she knew something no one else did. She didn't see him at first. She was talking to a group of people, laughing, sipping something pink. He didn't realize he was walking toward her until she turned and nearly bumped into him again. "You again," she said, smiling up at him. "Still barefoot?" he asked, glancing down. "Not tonight. I upgraded," she said, lifting one foot like a ballerina. "Though I might regret it. You clean up well." "I try." A man with a name tag that said Warren walked up beside her and handed her a drink. "There you go, Piper." She took it with a nod. "Thanks." Zayden's brow lifted. "You work on the cruise?" "No," Piper said, sipping her drink. "I'm one of the guest speakers. Wellness and mental health. I do retreats mostly. They invited me to talk about stress management." He lifted both brows. "That's actually impressive." She tilted her head. "You say that like you expected me to say I run the bingo night." "No," he said honestly. "I just wasn't expecting to see you here." "Same," she said. "You don't exactly scream cruise guy." "I'm not. Came for business." "Ah." She gave him a look. "Let me guess. You're either in finance or some kind of tech genius." "Neither," he said, sipping his drink. "Investments. Mostly strategic buyouts and mergers." Her eyes sparkled. "So you're the reason half these people are pretending to like each other." He laughed again. "Pretty much." Warren came back around, nudging Piper gently. "They want you at the mic in 10. She nodded. "Thanks." She glanced back at Zayden. "Duty calls." He leaned in slightly. "I'll stay and listen." She paused, then smiled. "Hope you're good at managing stress." He watched her walk away again, and this time she did glance back just once. By the time she stepped on stage and started speaking, Zayden had already canceled his post-dinner meeting through his assistant. He didn't know why. He just knew he wasn't ready to walk away. The next morning, he was on the upper deck with a coffee when he saw her again. This time, she was on a yoga mat leading a small group through some slow breathing exercises. She wore leggings and a tank top, hair up, no makeup, but still looked like the sun showed up just for her. When the session ended, she walked over. "You stalking me now?" she asked, grinning. "Just needed some air," he shrugged. "Didn't know there'd be a show." "Funny, I was about to say the same. You wear suits to tan. You think this is a suit?" He looked down at his linen shirt and slacks. She pulled off her hair tie and ran her fingers through her hair. "You're very composed." He shrugged. "It's a habit." She studied him for a second like she could see something beneath the surface. "You don't seem like the kind of guy who takes a lot of breaks." He sipped his coffee. "I don't." "Maybe you should." He looked at her for a beat. "Maybe I will." And just like that, they started spending time together. Every morning, she'd lead yoga or meditation, and he'd show up even if he didn't participate. He watched. They had lunch on the deck, shared ridiculous inside jokes about passengers, and walked under the stars after dinner. He bought her a mango gelato one night from the ship's fancy dessert bar, and she made him sing karaoke the next. He hadn't laughed this much in years. One afternoon, she found him alone on the balcony outside the ship's library, watching the ocean. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "Just thinking." She stepped beside him. "About what?" He looked at her. "How weird this all is. I came here for business. I didn't expect to meet someone like you." She smiled softly. "Same." He hesitated. "Piper, what happens when this cruise ends?" She looked out at the water, quiet for a moment. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I don't want this to be over." He reached for her hand. "Then let's not let it be." She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw it in her eyes. She was falling for him too. The clouds rolled over the horizon like a slow-moving storm, but the sea stayed calm, deceptively calm, like the tension building in Zayden's chest. He leaned against the deck's railing, watching Piper across the atrium. She was talking to a woman in a navy jumpsuit, gesturing animatedly, her hands moving with conviction. She had a way of drawing people in, not just with her words but with how present she was. She didn't glance around the room. She didn't check her watch. She gave people her full attention, and they gave her their trust in return. "You're worrying again." Her voice came from beside him a moment later. He hadn't seen her walk over. He straightened, not ready to admit how long he'd been standing there. "Just thinking," he said. "I still on the water." "You say that a lot." He turned to face her. "Do I?" She nodded, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're always thinking. But you never say what you're thinking about." He hesitated. "I'm used to keeping things to myself." "That's not always a strength, you know?" Something in her tone made him pause. She wasn't challenging him, just observing. And somehow that made it harder to deflect. "I've built everything I have by being careful," he said finally. "By not letting the wrong people too close." She looked at him, not blinking. "And what happens when the right person gets close, but you're still too guarded to let them in?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the railing again, gripping it with one hand. He hadn't expected vulnerability to be the hardest part of this cruise. Piper didn't press. She just stood beside him, quiet but unyielding. Later that evening, over dinner in the ship's more intimate bistro, Zayden watched her turn the wine glass slowly between her fingers. Her expression was distant, her usual spark dimmed. "You seem distracted," he said, setting down his fork. She looked up. "I got a message from my assistant this afternoon. One of the retreat centers I work with is pulling out of our agreement. They're selling the property." "That's the one in Joshua Tree?" She blinked. "How do you remember that?" "I listen when you talk." She looked down at her glass. "That place meant something to me. I held my first retreat there. It's where I realized I wanted to do this full time. It's more than just a venue." "You said the owners were older, right?" "Yeah. Semi-retired couple. They wanted to keep it in the wellness space, but I guess someone made them an offer they couldn't turn down." Zayden's jaw tightened. He knew what that meant. The same way he knew how many family-run businesses he'd seen erased by people like him, people with bigger wallets and colder intentions. "Have you thought about buying it yourself?" he asked. She gave a dry laugh. "With what?" "I make enough to live comfortably, but not enough to throw $500,000 at desert acreage." He studied her. Her frustration wasn't just financial. It was personal. Her work wasn't a job, it was a mission. A calling. "I might know someone who could help," he said carefully. She looked at him, brows knitting. "Are you offering to buy it for me?" I'm offering to invest, to back you. If it means the difference between losing something important or growing it into something bigger, I want to help. Her eyes narrowed. Why? He didn't flinch. Because I believe in what you do. And because I don't make investments unless I trust the person behind them. She leaned back in her seat, visibly unsettled. This feels like a turning point. Like if I say yes, everything changes. Maybe it does. She folded her arms. I need to think about it. Of course. But the silence that followed wasn't comfortable. It was taut, like both of them were realizing the stakes were changing faster than they could process. The next morning, she didn't show up for her usual yoga class. When Zayden asked a crew member, he was told she had reserved one of the smaller private lounges for herself. He found her sitting cross-legged on a mat, staring at the window where the endless blue stretched beyond the glass. You skipped, he said quietly. She didn't turn. I needed quiet. He walked in and sat beside her without invitation. I didn't mean to pressure you last night. I know. You've been quiet since I offered. I'm not used to people offering me things without expecting something in return. He turned to her. You think I have an angle? I think most people do. He let that settle before answering. I think you're scared that this isn't just about the retreat center. She finally looked at him. Is it? No, he said. It's not. She didn't respond right away. Then, softly, I don't know how to handle someone like you. Try. She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. You're not like the people I usually meet. They're grounded in things I understand. You're not. I can be, he said, but I won't pretend to be someone I'm not. I've built my life in a world of contracts, profits, and strategy. But that doesn't mean I can't care about something real. She turned her body slightly toward him. Then tell me something real. He hesitated only a second. My mother died when I was 20. She ran a florist shop. Small, quiet, beautiful. I didn't take over. I sold it. Took the money and used it to invest. That was my first deal. Her breath caught. You sold her shop? He nodded. I told myself it was what she would have wanted. But I've never stopped wondering if I made the wrong choice. Piper's voice was barely a whisper. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked for something real. And maybe it's time I stop hiding behind the polished version of myself. She moved closer, her voice steadier now. I don't want to be someone you impress. I want to be someone you let in. He looked at her, his expression raw. I want that too. They didn't kiss. Not then. But the air between them shifted, charged with something more than attraction, trust, fragile and new. That night, she knocked on his cabin door with a folded piece of paper in her hand. I called the owners, she said. They're willing to consider a buy offer, but only if it happens before the end of the month. Zayden took the paper, scanned the numbers, then looked back at her. Let's do it, he said. Her eyes widened. Just like that. I've made riskier deals for less meaningful things. A beat passed. Then she whispered, I'm scared. He reached for her hand. So am I. She didn't pull away. Instead, she stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. The deal closed 2 days after the cruise docked in Barcelona. Piper stepped off the ship with a signed purchase agreement folded in her canvas bag, and Zayden's hand wrapped around hers like it had always belonged there. They had barely slept the night before, half from excitement, half from the weight of what they were walking into. The air between them wasn't light anymore. It held something deeper, heavier. Piper's flight back to California wasn't until the next morning. Zayden extended his hotel suite reservation in the city without even asking, just handed her a keycard when they stepped into the car waiting at the port. You didn't have to do that, she said, watching the old building slide past the window. Zayden leaned back, one arm stretched across the back of the seat. You think I'd let you stay in some generic airport hotel after what we just pulled off? She looked over at him. What exactly did we just pull off? His lips curved slightly. A miracle. In under 3 days. The suite was in a building that overlooked the Gothic Quarter, a place filled with twisting streets and stone balconies dripping with vines. The living room had floor-to-ceiling windows and a bottle of something expensive already chilling in a crystal bucket on the table. Piper walked straight to the balcony and stepped out, the breeze tugging at her sleeves. "I don't know how to process this," she said without turning. "I should be panicking. But I'm not." Zayden joined her, resting his hands on the railing. "That's because it was supposed to happen." She didn't respond right away. "I've never had anyone back me like this before. Not without strings. Not without trying to take over." "I didn't back a project," he said. "I backed you." For the first time since the deal, she looked shaken. "And what happens now?" He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a slim envelope. "This happens." She stared at it. "What is that?" "I know you don't like surprises," he said. "But this one's important." She took it, opening it slowly. Inside was a printed itinerary. She read it twice before speaking. "You booked a week in Arizona. The Sedona Retreat Center. It's one of the best in the country. I figured you might want to see how the big players are doing it. Take notes. Get inspired." She blinked. "This is next week. There's a driver waiting at the airport for you. I'll have a team prep the legal transition while you're gone." She looked up at him cautiously. "You're not coming?" "I can't. I've got a board meeting in New York. But I'll meet you at the property when you're back." She folded the paper, her voice soft. "You think of everything." He didn't respond. Instead, he stepped closer and touched her cheek. "I think about you." The kiss that followed wasn't impulsive. It was slow, unhurried, and full of promises neither were brave enough to speak out loud yet. The next morning, he watched her walk through the airport terminal until she disappeared into the crowd. Something coiled tight in his chest as she went. He wasn't used to goodbyes. Not the kind that mattered. Back in New York, the boardroom smelled like polished wood and stale ambition. Zayden slipped back into his role with ease, presenting numbers, dissecting projections, and deflecting questions about the risky acquisition he'd made on a wellness retreat in the middle of the desert. "I thought we were focusing on biotech this quarter," one of the directors said, tapping a pen against her notepad. "Why the sudden pivot to emotional healing?" Zayden didn't flinch. "Because impact matters. And I'm not interested in just making noise. I'm interested in building something that lasts." The room fell silent for a moment, then someone cleared their throat and moved on. But Zayden could feel the undercurrent of disapproval. He didn't care. For once, he wasn't playing for their approval. A week later, Piper returned from Sedona with sunburned shoulders and a notebook full of ideas. She found a package waiting for her at the front desk of her temporary hotel in Palm Springs. Inside was a set of vintage keys and a note written in Zayden's sharp handwriting. "Welcome home." The retreat center was still empty, furniture covered. Windows dusty, but the land felt alive. Piper stood in the middle of the main room and turned in a slow circle. She could already see the future classes, the sunrise meditations, the people who would find pieces of themselves here. Zayden arrived 2 hours later in a black SUV that looked like it belonged in a presidential convoy. He stepped out in jeans and a linen shirt, sunglasses pushed into his hair, carrying a bag of groceries. "You brought snacks?" she asked as he walked in. "I brought dinner," he corrected, lifting a paper bag. "You didn't think I was going to let you eat vending machine almonds on your first night, did you?" They cooked together in the outdated kitchen, him chopping, her seasoning. They ate on the back porch as the sun dipped behind the rocky hills, the sky bleeding into gold. "I've been thinking," Piper said, pushing her plate aside, "about how we do this. The center. The programs. The actual structure." He leaned back in the chair. "Tell me. I don't want investors. Not beyond you. I want it to stay small enough to be personal. I want real stories. Real healing, not some 5-star resort experience with a juice bar and a gift shop." He nodded. "Then we build it your way." She hesitated. "You really mean that?" "I didn't buy into this to run it. I'm here to support you, not to lead it." She looked at him, her voice barely audible. "You're not what I expected." He leaned forward. resting his arms on the table. And what did you expect? A man who'd forget me the second we docked. Someone who'd go back to skyscrapers and suits and pretend the ocean never happened. He reached across the table and laced his fingers with hers. I don't forget what matters. They stayed like that as the sky darkened, neither of them needing to say the word that had been growing between them for days. But that night, long after she thought he was asleep, Piper slipped out to the porch in a sweatshirt and sat under the stars. Zayden followed her moments later, barefoot and quiet. I couldn't sleep, she admitted. He lowered himself beside her. What's keeping you up? She hesitated. What if I mess this up? What if I prove everyone who doubted me right? He didn't answer at first. Then quietly, you won't. But even if you did, I'd still be here. She turned toward him in the dark. Why? Because I didn't fall for the idea of you. I fell for you. She didn't cry. But something inside her cracked open, like a door she'd been holding shut for years. And in the silence that followed, she finally let herself believe it. The first guest arrived at the retreat center just before sunrise. Piper stood barefoot on the porch, her clipboard tucked under one arm and a thermos of coffee in her hand, watching a dusty SUV approach the main gate. The gravel crunched under the tires like a slow heartbeat, and she felt it. Everything she'd built, everything she was about to begin becoming real in a way nothing ever had before. Zayden stepped outside behind her, his tie still loose from the morning call he'd taken with his legal team. She's early, he said, nodding toward the vehicle. She's nervous, Piper replied. People who show up early usually are. He stayed quiet, watching her. She hadn't stopped moving since they opened registration. She'd built the program by hand, scheduled each workshop with obsessive care, and hand-picked every guest speaker. But now, with the first retreat about to begin, she looked still focused, composed. Until she turned to him. What if I can't reach them? He didn't answer right away. Then, you don't have to reach everyone. Just the ones who are ready. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. You should go. I told you I'm staying through the weekend. I know, she said, softer now. But if you don't leave now, you'll miss your meeting in LA. I've missed more important things for less important people. She walked down the steps to meet the SUV, not responding. By nightfall, 6 more guests had arrived. The retreat center hummed with quiet energy somewhere between nervous anticipation and cautious hope. Piper led the first circle on the back patio beneath a string of antique bulbs, her voice low and steady as she welcomed them. Zayden watched from the shadows, far enough not to intrude, close enough to see the way her words settled into the group like a bomb. Later, after the guests retired to their cabins, she found him on the porch with one foot propped against the railing, scrolling through something on his phone. I didn't thank you, she said, folding her arms. For what? For not turning this into something flashy. You could've. You didn't. He slid the phone into his pocket. I didn't need to. You're the show. She laughed. And for the first time that day, it reached her eyes. You're terrible at compliments. I'm not trying to be good at them. I'm trying to be honest. She sat beside him, pulling her knees into her chest. There's something I haven't told you. Zayden turned to her, the breeze catching a strand of her hair. What is it? The week after I got back from Sedona, I got a call from a publisher. They want me to write a book. About healing, mindfulness, all of it. His brows lifted. That's huge. I haven't said yes yet. Why not? Because if I take it, it changes everything. I'll have to travel more. Speak more. I won't be here all the time. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you should do it. She looked at him, unsure. You really think so? I think the world needs more of you in it. And I think if this, he gestured between them, is what I believe it is, we'll make it work. Wherever you are. Her shoulders dropped, tension she hadn't acknowledged easing away. You always know what to say. I don't, he murmured. But I know what not to lose. She leaned her head against his shoulder. They didn't speak for a while after that. 3 weeks later, Piper stood backstage at a wellness conference in Santa Fe, microphone clipped to her shirt, her heart beating in time with the drum circle echoing from the main hall. The chairperson had just introduced her as a rising voice in emotional resilience. Zayden had flown in the night before and sat in the front row. No tie, sleeves rolled to his elbows, eyes locked on her like she was the only person in the room. After the panel, he joined her outside beneath a woven canopy, handing her a bottle of water. "You killed it. I tripped on the mic cord," she said, catching her breath. "They didn't notice. I did." He smiled. "That's what makes you real." The next morning, they walked through the farmer's market together. She picked out herbs for the retreat kitchen. He bought her a leather-bound journal from a booth run by a Navajo artist. "Write the book," he said, handing it to her. She traced the embossed cover. "You sure you're ready for the chaos?" "I didn't sign up for calm. I signed up for you." She stopped walking. "You really did, didn't you?" He paused too, turning to her. "I meant it. All of it." She swallowed hard. "Then I have something for you too." She opened her bag and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a hand-drawn sketch of the retreat center, watercolor splashed across the sky, and beneath it, a set of initials ZO painted in the lower corner. "This is the new logo," she said. "I had it commissioned." He stared at it, unmoving. "Why my initials?" "Because it wouldn't exist without you. And because I want people to know who believed in it first." He didn't speak. Instead, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her right there in the middle of the market, surrounded by strangers and the scent of roasted chilies. She didn't care. Neither did he. 2 months later, the retreat center was fully booked through the next year. Piper's book deal was signed. She split her time between writing and teaching, and every time she flew back into Palm Springs, Zayden was waiting on the other side of the security line. One evening, after the last guest had left and the desert was lit with stars, he built a fire in the outdoor pit and called her outside. She stepped into the chilly air wrapped in a blanket, her hair loose around her shoulders. "We've come a long way from that cruise," she said, sitting beside him. "I still think about that first day," he replied, tossing another log onto the flames. She laughed. "When I nearly knocked you over? When I realized I didn't want to leave that deck without knowing your name." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You never did tell me what made you get on that cruise in the first place." He pulled something from his jacket pocket, a small velvet box, worn along the edges. "I was supposed to go with my father. He passed before we left. I went anyway. I thought maybe I'd find something. Closure, maybe?" She sat up slowly. "Zayden." "I didn't find closure," he said, opening the box to reveal a ring nestled inside, gold with a desert opal in the center. "I found you." Her eyes filled, but she didn't speak. She couldn't. He reached for her hand. "I don't need a perfect plan. I just need you. So whatever your answer is, whether we build this life slow or fast, just tell me you're in." She blinked, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'm in. Always." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and the fire crackled beside them as the desert wind carried their laughter into the night. Piper stood barefoot in the dry grass, the hem of her cotton dress brushing against her ankles as she surveyed the freshly finished meditation deck. The cedar planks still smelled new, raw and warm from the afternoon sun. Wind chimes danced lazily from the tall beams, their gentle notes barely audible over the rustle of sagebrush in the distance. Zayden approached from behind, his footsteps quiet against the earth. He held a rolled-up banner in one hand and a clipboard in the other, wearing a navy crewneck and well-worn jeans that made him look like he belonged more to this place than any boardroom in Manhattan. "I got the final guest list," he said, handing her the clipboard. 37 confirmed. 3 waitlisted. Piper scanned the names briefly, then set it down on the small table beside the deck. "I can't believe it. 6 retreats already, and we're still turning people away." "You built something rare," he said. "People feel that." She turned to him, shading her eyes from the sun. "You still okay with how involved you are? I know you said you didn't want to run anything." "I'm not running it," he interrupted gently. "I'm helping you protect it. That's different. You've gone from billion-dollar mergers to printing name tags." He gave a quiet laugh. "Mergers don't smell like rosemary and lavender. And I've never had a boardroom full of people thank me with tears in their eyes. She watched him for a moment, her expression unreadable. You're different here. I'm more myself. They walked toward the main house together, the gravel crunching beneath their steps. A few volunteers were setting up lanterns for the evening welcome ceremony, and someone was stringing eucalyptus garlands above the entry path. Everything pulsed with anticipation. Inside, the welcome kits were stacked neatly on the long wooden table. Piper had refinished herself, each one filled with handwritten journal prompts, dried herbs, and a small pouch of crystals chosen by the guest's birth month. She picked up one and ran her fingers over the embossed tag. I talked to the publisher, she said, not looking up. They want to fast-track the book. They're moving up the release. Zayden leaned against the counter. Is that good or overwhelming? Both. She finally met his gaze. They also want a second one, a follow-up on relationships and emotional safety. You should do it. I want to, but I don't want to lose this. She gestured around the room. The center, the people, you. You won't. We'll adjust. We always do. She exhaled, then walked over to him and slipped her arms around his waist. How is it that you always know how to make it feel possible? Because you've already done the impossible. I'm just here to remind you of it. Their quiet moment was interrupted by movement at the door. A woman stepped in, older, sun-hardened, with a wide smile and a clipboard of her own. Sorry to interrupt, she said cheerfully, but the guests are starting to arrive. Piper nodded. We'll be right there. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the desert, Piper stood at the center of the welcome circle. Zayden sat off to the side, watching her with an ease that had taken months to earn. She welcomed each guest by name, her voice steady but warm, grounding everyone in the space they'd all come to heal. That night, as the sky turned indigo and the lanterns flickered against the adobe walls, Zayden led her outside, past the cabins and up a narrow trail that curved along the ridge. Where are we going? She asked, breathless from the climb. You'll see. At the top, he stopped. A blanket had been laid out beneath a string of solar lights, a small table set up with 2 glasses and a bottle of her favorite red blend from Paso Robles. The stars stretched endlessly above them. You did this? She asked, stunned. He sat down, pouring the wine. You've been giving to everyone else all week. Tonight's for you. She sat beside him, her hand resting on his knee. This is perfect. I was thinking, he said after a sip. About us. Her heart picked up. What about us? I want more. Not just the retreats, or the book tours, or the nights like this. I want the mornings too. The hard days. The small moments no one else sees. She watched him, her breath caught in her chest. I want a life with you, Piper. Not just visits and weekends and planning around events. I want to build something permanent. She stared at him, eyes searching. You mean, I want to marry you? He didn't reach for a ring. There was no box this time. Just his words, steady and unshakable, rooted in everything they'd built. She didn't speak right away. Then she reached up, touched his cheek, and whispered, yes. His breath left him in a quiet exhale as she leaned in, kissing him slowly, the desert wind warm around them. They stayed there long after the wine was gone, wrapped in a shared blanket, watching the stars. They talked about who they would invite to the wedding, where they'd go afterward, and how they'd merge their 2 very different lives into one. Months passed quickly. The wedding was held at the retreat center beneath the same archway where Piper welcomed each group. Guests sat on hand-woven blankets, and wildflowers lined the aisle. Her dress was made by a local artisan, simple and elegant, and Zayden wore a cream linen suit with no tie, his hair windswept and free. They wrote their own vows. I fell in love with you on an ocean, she said, eyes shimmering. And every day since, you've given me reasons to stay grounded. I didn't know what peace felt like until I met you, he told her. You gave it to me without asking for anything in return. They danced barefoot on the deck beneath the stars, surrounded by the people they loved and the land that had become their home. In the months that followed, Piper's book hit bestseller lists, and she was invited to speak on international platforms. Zayden continued managing his investments, but shifted more time to the center, eventually launching a mental health fund to support small wellness spaces across the country using their model as the blueprint. They built a small home just beyond the retreat grounds, filled it with plants and laughter, and one day, a little girl with Piper's eyes and Zayden's quiet focus. She grew up playing in the gardens, attending yoga classes before she could even spell the word, and calling the guests auntie and uncle, as if they were part of the family. Their life was not perfect. It was full of early mornings, late nights, and the kind of work that demanded everything. But it was theirs, built from chance, risk, and the kind of love that never needed to be flashy to be deep. And every year, on the anniversary of the cruise where it all began, they'd open a bottle of wine, sit on the deck, and watch the stars. Not because they needed to remember, but because they'd never forgotten.